Now, there's a pretty cool horror indie game going around, or at this point it's been around for quite some time, but it's called Crow Country. And it is a fairly short, somewhat frustrating type of game, but honestly, it kind of hits all the indie horror beats that you would really want. Specifically, it's got a really cool aesthetic and this whole setting where you're in this like haunted theme park and there's this mystery that's going on while you're running away from like monsters and stuff like that. It is very intriguing. And as you go throughout the game and put together all the different things that happen, there's still one mystery that actually remains more or less unsolved, and that's this reoccurring number that pops up all throughout, 2106. And so, with that, let's talk about the significance of 2106 and what it actually means. And, of course, hey, there's gonna be a lot of spoilers ahead, so click away if you don't want to get this game spoiled, but if you're down to clown, then let's just get right into it. Alright, so basically, a lot of the backstory of what actually happened leading up to this whole amusement park being a disaster is explained by Edward Crow right before the final boss battle where he turns into this big mutant thing. And before we can even talk about what 2106 is, we kind of need to follow that stuff because it has direct implications in solving kind of what that mystery is. So Edward Crow founded Crow Country, and with his group of people, basically, they started harvesting these big green wiggly things that were kind of coming out of the ground, which he affectionately named roots, and what he noticed was, inside of them, pure gold. Eventually, he opened up Crow Country on top of where these roots were kind of popping out of the ground, with the whole idea of it being this elaborate cover-up so that they could extract the gold and then kind of rinse their hands of it, send it all the way down to South America, put it back inside some more, and make it seem like they found it outside of the United States. Then a certain problem started to happen though. The origin of all of these roots that were kind of coming out of the ground is called the pool, upon which mutants started to come through. And as one can imagine, that turned the theme park into more of a horror show. And, well, the amusement park did have to shut down with all these mutants popping out of the pool. But in his monologue, Edward Crow explains that the roots were actually antennae that were supposed to calibrate this machine, which was the pool, or some sort of portal, where humans were trying to come back out of the pool and communicate with people of that time. But because he was kind of cutting and harvesting all the gold out of these antennae, they were coming out extremely mutated. And as he continued to harvest, the mutation got even worse, where all of these crazy things started to happen. And more or less that explains why all of the enemies in the game progressively get more and more mutated and beyond recognition for even what a human might be like. It was because he was cutting out this antenna, and so the machine wasn't calibrated. And of course, you play as Elaine in this story, disguising herself as Mara, who was the original victim of one of these mutants that came through. It attacked her, and then she had to go to the hospital, and then contracted this big bacteria thing that could not be cured by the hospital. So this is her coming back to tell Edward Crow that, hey, you killed me, this is on your hands. And so we find ourselves in the start of the game where the entire amusement park has been shut down, overrun by all sorts of these mutants in various shapes and sizes, and all of the people who were in Crow Country at the time and got attacked by the mutants, well, they got the bacteria on them as well, and so it's not looking good because they're all starting to develop symptoms. The kicker is, Edward Crow actually reverse engineered some sort of cure, upon which all of the people who were in Crow Country then can take the cure and be okay with the bacteria and continue living on with their lives. Cool, everything is great, the end. But then that still leaves the question, what the heck is 2106? Because sure, now we understand the whole backstory of everything, but this number would periodically showcase itself throughout the game, as early as the very beginning of the game, and then continuing on and becoming even more and more prevalent in all of these locations the further you get. Now, in his monologue, Edward Crow says, hey, you know, the first guest, he wasn't super mutated, so he was able to give me a little bit of information, and I scribbled it down onto a note, and then I continued to do the harvesting, and so even more mutants came out, but that's besides the point. And he hands Elaine this note before the boss fight, but of course it's pretty easy to overlook this because, well, a giant mutant Edward Crow has just popped out of the pool and is trying to kill you. You might forget that you now have this new item, which is a folded piece of paper in your inventory. If you open up the piece of paper, it will read 2106, Uninhabitable, Ruin, We Come, 1988, Last Chance, Warn, Stop, Change. Now that's a cryptic warning if I've ever heard one, but I think there's a little bit more to this story, and we can kind of pin down exactly what had devastated the world to make it kind of fit this description, because clearly this is saying 2106, that's the future, the world is cooked, we need to figure out a way to go back in time and prevent this from happening. So what do I think actually happened resulting in kind of this end of the world? Well, All the human mutants were coming through this portal carrying this strange bacteria where, as soon as they touch somebody, they're infecting them, and there's no known medical treatment at the time. And Edward Crowe even goes on to describe that the more that people are interacting with these mutants, the faster the bacteria starts to spread, deteriorating them even faster, leading to an even worse infection. As a matter of fact, he says that this is the reason why he didn't pay for Elaine's medical treatment in the first place. It's because he knew that there was going to be no cure, and so there was no point in trying to pay for it because Elaine was just going to die. It's kind of grim. That screams entrepreneurial billionaire, but So this is where I think it gets kind of funny, because the bacteria, I think, is the main source that is going to end the world. And unknowingly, all of the people trying to go back in time to prevent the end of the world from happening are the ones who are bringing this bacteria back in time, making the bacteria this crazy little time loop thing, which inevitably spells the disaster of the world in 2106. And to me, this makes a lot of sense because even as we know that different people are going through the portal, resulting in these different mutations as time has gone on, there's always one constant thing, and that's if you interact with any of them, no matter how mutated or non-mutated they are, you will get infected by this bacteria if they touch you. Thus, to me, that means that all of the people kind of going through the portal and coming back in time to try and prevent this disaster are carrying that exact same bacteria, meaning this thing is all over the planet at that point. And I know you might be scratching your heads because, well, at the end of the game, Edward Crowe, he's got these vials there. You can pick up the vials and then you drink it and you're all good. So clearly, humankind should be able to go ahead and do something about this. They should be able to figure out some sort of cure. But I think that there's enough pieces of evidence that exist right here to suggest that this bacteria really is the main reason for the end of the world, causing the people from 2106 to jump through the portal to try and reach 1988 to prevent it from happening. First of all, we know that bacteria actually mutates incredibly quickly, and from all the biology lessons that I've taken, those mutations can become more resistant to things that might initially solve them. For a real-life example, take a look at methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. I definitely said that wrong, but it's MRSA if you're not familiar with it. This is a bacteria strain that causes staph infection, and we're starting to see now that some of these strains of bacteria are becoming very resistant to the modern antibiotics that we had initially used to treat these staph infections. If we take that into account with the fact that the cells were also kind of going through the pool with all the mutated humans, it's very likely that this increased the rate of mutation for this deadly strain of bacteria. And if there's a very genetically diverse set of this deadly strain, it makes it even more difficult to try and combat it, and also to prevent it from mutating further and creating all sorts of different variations of itself, which could be more or less resistant to the modern treatments that you would expect. It's kind of ironic because I do think that Edward Crowe making the cures at that point in time, that could have actually been good enough to prevent it from spreading further. But as soon as time continues to go on, if this thing starts mutating at a very rapid rate, and clearly the guests are not slowing down coming through the pool, then there's just going to be so many different strains of this one singular bacteria that it very easily could overwhelm the world. It's extremely ironic because the people going back in time to try and prevent the world from becoming destroyed and going apocalypse mode are the main reasons why this bacteria starts to spread. Obviously, Edward Crowe also making sure that they're all mutants on arrival doesn't help, but they continuously are going through the portal trying to go back in time to warn it, to prevent the future from happening, and they themselves are the ones that are introducing the thing that ends the world. There's another component of this that I'd like to talk about, and that's the word uninhabitable, which is put into that note, which I think is actually really interesting here. Because if you look at most apocalyptic-based media of some sort of contagion that sweeps the world, the one thing that always remains constant is that the world remains inhabitable. There's still plant life, there's still animals roaming around and stuff like that. So how does this bacteria that is supposed to wipe out humanity make the world uninhabitable? Well, I actually think that there is a little bit of evidence to suggest that it's not exactly that deadly to the humans in 2106 anymore. If this bacteria were to decimate the human population, Last of Us type of style, then, well, everyone should be dead by the year 2106 rolls around. But the fact that there are humans going through the pool from 2106 and also too are carrying the deadly strain of bacteria on them consistently, to me that says that humans that had survived until that long have developed some sort of immunity or were able to treat the infection themselves naturally through their body processes to prevent actual death from occurring. To me, sure, they might not be technologically advanced at that point in time, but that doesn't mean that the world should be uninhabitable. So how does this bacteria translate over to making the world uninhabitable? What I think might have happened was the bacteria mutated again and might have changed to start processing plant life or organic matter or something of the kind in order to sustain itself even more. And if you think about the fact that humanity was probably still devastated by the bacteria, that would have technologically set them back so many years, and so they wouldn't have had any sort of solution to prevent this bacteria from spreading across all of the plant life throughout Earth. I picture something along the lines of Horizon Zero Dawn, where, spoiler alert for Horizon Zero Dawn, a game that's been out for who knows how long at this point. But instead of these robots that were just consuming plant life in order to replicate themselves, this could have just been a substitute in for the bacteria. The bacteria was now eating away at all of the natural plant life on Earth and using that to replicate itself. So even if the humans were now immune to the deadly effects of this, that doesn't stop all the greenery from being erased from Earth. And at that point, without any plants or anything like that, the Earth just becomes this big rock, namely uninhabitable. So I think desperately the humans in the future who were now resistant to this bacteria were really trying to use the pool to prevent the bacteria from spreading, not necessarily to humanity, but to prevent it, period. Because clearly this thing is going to mutate to destroy everything on Earth, not just kill people from this uncurable infection. And so desperately, the humans then used the pool to stop the bacteria from being introduced in 1988, maybe to provide assistance in stopping it from ever spreading in the first place, but were unknowingly spreading it themselves because Edward Crow's greed messed up the entire plan. That's pretty interesting for a horror game. You know what I mean when I say that it ticks off all the boxes there? But seriously, it is really interesting, and I'd be so curious to hear what people think, because I've looked online and there feels like there is a consensus across the board about people coming back from the future, but I think the super bacteria evolving and like killing all the plant life, that's something that really hasn't been discussed. And I think that it is an excellent nod to kind of include something like that, which makes it just a little bit more interesting, because this becomes a lot more than just trying to survive an amusement park horror show. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you played Crow's Country, because I'm not gonna lie, I tried it on the hardest difficulty the first time playing through, and it was a little frustrating, a little obtuse, but I just loved the vibe on it, so I ended up seeing it through because, it's a classic like PlayStation horror game. I think that's all really fun. Alrighty, well, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and we will catch you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, appreciate it. Lore dumps, woo! Alright, we'll talk to you later. Bye everybody.